here. And this is where we're going to go to what we call triggers. As we got into sort of 1928 into 1929, what we found is that everybody had gone out and bought the appliances they wanted, the new cars they wanted, and the homes they wanted. There had been sort of pent-up demand from that from before, during World War II and so on, World War I. There had been pent-up demand for it and all these new fancy stuff, and so there had been a lot of buying through the middle of the 1920s. But now that buying started plateauing off. It really wasn't going down significantly yet, it was just plateauing. So consumption slowed. Business investment slowed. It's not grammatically correct, sorry. Business investment slowed, and home ownership didn't drop or anything. They didn't have a housing crisis, but we'd sort of, all the people who were going to buy the home had kind of bought one. So let's just call it a plateau. Just kind of slowed and went flat. Now, there was a Federal Reserve system, and although I don't know they had the Open Market Committee at that point, but nonetheless, there was a Federal Reserve System, there was a board, they were charged with monetary policy, and they were very worried about the money supply and about interest, inflation, and the things that the Federal Reserve is interested in today. Although they're much less sophisticated, and there was it was a different sort of cultural feeling back then about just how involved the Federal Reserve should be in managing the economy. They certainly felt they had to do something, but it wasn't the same sense of real urgency and all that we might think of the Federal Reserve today. What the Federal Reserve did in mid-1929, the Fed tightened the money supply. Sitting where they were, let's say in June or July of 1929, to them, with the data available to them, it seemed like the economy was still too frothy, too exuberant, there was too much of a chance of inflation. And so they resolved to slow the economy down by tightening the money supply. When they do that, what happens to interest rates?
They go up.
Say that again?
They go up.
They go up. When you tighten the money supply, if you remember, what the Fed can do, if this is the market for money and here's interest rates, quantity, demand and supply, if they decide that the economy is too hot and they want to shift aggregate demand to the left, what they do is they reduce the supply of money, which then raises the interest rates. Raising the interest rates makes it harder for people to borrow money to buy things, and makes it harder for businesses to borrow money to make investments, and so both those things slow down. So that was the intent of the Fed in the mid-1920s, 29, midpoint in that year. We're still 3 or 4 months before the stock market crash, and that's an important point. If you've read U.S. history before or have heard about the Depression, we all sort of think of the stock market crash in October 1929 as the beginning of the Depression, but really things started going south earlier that summer. And the first big thing that happened is that the Fed reduced the money supply. In retrospect, that was exactly the wrong thing to do. And there are some folks who think that they, even with the data they had, that they made the wrong decision. But I'm willing to give them a benefit, pretty considerable benefit of the doubt here. Again, we're talking the mid-1920s here, or the late 1920s, and they didn't have computers or fax machines or fiber optic data communication networks and all that kind of stuff. All of their data got collected manually in various parts of the country and sent by telegraph or by express mail or courier or something someplace, and then in some office, some poor person's there using slide rules or mechanical adding machines and all to try to add all this stuff up. So it's not like you could just have your finger, if you're the Fed, you couldn't have your finger on the pulse of the economy and know exactly what's going on. Probably a lot of the data that they were working with was months old, just because of the absence of technology that we're used to today. But whether or not you give them benefit of the doubt, it ended up being a really bad thing. And since what had already happened is that aggregate demand had already shifted to the left, not a lot, but it started, people weren't buying quite as much. Business wasn't investing quite as much. And so, everybody had a car and they were still running, so you didn't need to go out and buy a new one. We weren't into the 3 years obsolescence sort of thing that we got used to later on. So as people sort of slowed down their demands for goods and services, that means aggregate demand shifted to the left. But then the Fed, acting either on bad data or on bad judgment, decided to make things even worse by raising interest rates. Everybody follow that? It's an important sort of piling on problem. Okay, so things had already started slowing down. The Fed made it worse, and then we had the stock market crash. And even though this depression really didn't start there, the stock market crash was a big October. And the stock market crashed, and in one day they had a huge loss, and then over a period of just, a short period of time, a huge amount of wealth disappeared, poof, and up into smoke. So the wealth effect then meant that slowing consumption and slowing investment now became just rock bottom. There was, the stock market took any desire for people to go out and buy new things, especially big new ticket items, durable equipment and stuff. They took any excitement out of that. People pulled in and stopped buying things. So consumption really dropped off pretty significantly. The other thing that happened was back to our friends, the banks. The banks had gotten on board this sort of frothy stock manipulation sort of thing, and they had bought stocks, not manipulation, but stock investments. They had bought stocks too in hope of making big bucks, but now they woke up one day with nothing on that side of the balance sheet. If they were accurate about their financial forecast, they had to basically write off all that money that they had in stocks because now they weren't worth anything. They still owed, let's say me, $100. So that meant that in order for this to balance their net worth, the total value of the organization had to contract by $100, not by 100, by 40. Had to contract by this loss in value in the stocks. And for some banks who had been way overextended here and maybe had been only sort of profitable here, this drop in value threatened them to the point where they might not have hardly any net worth. They may not be worth anything, and what that led to were bank failures. So we have the wealth effect here plus bank failures.